In a world where innocence should be protected, sometimes even the most peaceful moments can turn into unexpected battles. Catherine, a gentle girl with a passion for drawing, never imagined that her quiet day at the zoo would lead to an encounter with cruelty and courage. But what happens when the one person meant to protect becomes the one who attacks? Welcome to our channel, where we bring you heartwarming, emotional stories that resonate with the soul. We believe in crafting tales that inspire, evoke feelings, and connect us all. Join us on this storytelling journey, where every tale is designed to touch your heart and ignite your imagination. Don't forget to subscribe, as your support helps us create more inspiring content for you. Catherine was filled with excitement as she sat by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees outside. Today was no ordinary day. It was the first time in 5 long months that her father, Commandant Harris, was home. He had been away, serving in the army, and though Catherine and her older brother, Ben, were proud of him, they missed him terribly. The moment they heard his footsteps outside the house the evening before, they had rushed to him, wrapping him in tight hugs that seemed to last forever. To celebrate his return, their dad had promised a special trip to the zoo the next day. Catherine loved animals, especially the gentle ones like birds and giraffes. More than anything, she loved to draw them. She carried her sketchbook everywhere she went, her colored pencils tucked neatly inside. Drawing made her feel free, as if she could express all the things she couldn't say with words. Her brother, Ben, was always there to help her, making sure she had what she needed, especially since Catherine used a wheelchair. She had been born with a condition that made walking difficult, but she never let it stop her from enjoying life. That morning, the family piled into the car, and the drive to the zoo was filled with laughter and stories. Commandant Harris asked Ben and Catherine about all the things they had done while he was away, and they happily filled him in. The zoo was a favorite family spot, and Catherine had been counting down the days until they could go again. When they arrived, Catherine's eyes lit up. She felt like she could spend hours here, just drawing and feeding the animals. Her dad knew how much she loved this place, so he made sure to plan plenty of time for her to enjoy every part of it. They visited the monkeys first, watching them swing from the trees, and then moved on to the giraffes, Catherine's favorite animals to draw. After a while, Commandant Harris, feeling a bit tired, decided to take a rest under a large shade tree. He trusted Ben to look after his sister as he always did, and gave them a little money to buy food for the animals. "Stay close," he reminded them, "and call me if you need anything." Catherine and Ben wandered off to explore the nearby exhibits. Catherine was completely absorbed in her drawing, sketching the tall giraffes as they gracefully chewed on leaves. Ben stood nearby, watching the animals and occasionally checking on his sister. The day was warm, but not too hot, and everything felt perfect. As Catherine worked on her sketch, she didn't notice the stern-faced officer nearby. Officer James, one of the zoo's security guards, was watching them. He had a scowl on his face, something dark and unfriendly about him. To him, Catherine and her wheelchair were just a nuisance, taking up space in his zoo. But for now, Catherine was lost in her drawing, unaware of the trouble brewing just a few steps away. As Catherine sat quietly near the giraffe exhibit, her hands carefully gliding her pencil across the paper, she was fully absorbed in her sketch. The giraffe's long neck and graceful movements fascinated her, and she wanted to capture every detail. Ben stood nearby, leaning against the railing, keeping an eye on both the animals and his little sister. It was a peaceful moment for them both, one filled with the simple joy of spending time together in a place they loved. But not everyone shared their peaceful mood. Officer James, one of the zoo's security guards, had been watching Catherine and Ben from a distance. He wasn't the kind of man who liked kids, and seeing Catherine in her wheelchair with her sketchpad only made him angrier for no reason other than his own twisted prejudice. To him, she didn't belong there. She was taking up space, and he didn't care that she was minding her own business. The sight of her quietly drawing annoyed him, as if her mere presence was an inconvenience. Ben, sensing something was wrong, noticed the officer staring at them. His stomach knotted with worry. Officer James was tall and intimidating, with a look in his eyes that made Ben feel uncomfortable. Ben didn't want to leave Catherine's side, but something told him that trouble was coming. He thought about calling his dad, who was sitting under a tree not far away, but he didn't want to worry him if it was nothing. So he stayed close, hoping the officer would just leave them alone. Unfortunately, Officer James had no intention of ignoring them. He stormed over, his heavy footsteps making Catherine look up from her drawing. Startled, she clutched her sketchbook to her chest as Officer James loomed over her. His face was hard, eyes narrowed, and his voice was harsh. "You're in the way," he growled, though there was plenty of space around her. Catherine, confused, looked around. She wasn't blocking anyone. She was just sitting quietly, minding her own business. Before she could say anything, Ben stepped forward. "She's not doing anything wrong," he said, his voice wavering. He was trying to be brave, but he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Officer James, however, wasn't interested in hearing what Ben had to say. "I told you to move it," he snapped. Without warning, he reached down and shoved Catherine's wheelchair hard. The force of the push knocked Catherine out of the chair, and she tumbled to the ground with a thud. Her sketchbook flew from her hands, her pencils scattering across the gravel. For a moment, everything went silent. Ben's heart raced in panic as he watched his sister hit the ground. Catherine gasped, her hands scraping the rough gravel beneath her. Tears welled up in her eyes as pain shot through her body. She had never been treated this way before. Ben was frozen with shock, but then something inside him snapped. "Dad!" he screamed, his voice shaking with fear and anger. "Dad, help!" His voice rang out across the zoo, catching the attention of the other visitors. Some had already seen what happened, and gasps of horror spread through the crowd. Officer James, realizing what he had done, stepped back, but there was no apology on his face, only a sneer. He stood there as if daring anyone to question him, but the crowd around him began to stir. People were pointing, whispering, and stepping forward to help Catherine. Catherine lay on the ground, stunned and hurt, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her hands were bleeding from where she had tried to catch herself. She didn't understand why this man had hurt her, why he was so cruel. She had just been drawing. What had she done to deserve this? Ben knelt beside her, helping her up as best as he could. "It's okay, Catherine," he said, his voice shaky but trying to be strong. "Dad's coming. He'll be here soon." But as Officer James stood there, towering over them with his hateful glare, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse. The zoo visitors who had witnessed Officer James's cruel act gathered around in shock, unsure of what to do next. Ben's desperate cries for help rang through the air, reaching people far beyond the giraffe exhibit. Several onlookers rushed to Catherine's side, offering tissues for her scraped hands and helping to lift her wheelchair upright. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Catherine's world was spinning, her heart pounding with fear and confusion. Officer James, meanwhile, stood frozen. He had expected the crowd to stay silent, to mind their own business, but he quickly realized that this wasn't going to be the case. Whispers began to spread through the group of onlookers. "Do you know who that is?" someone murmured to their companion. "That's Commandant Harris's daughter." Another person nodded, their voice full of concern. "He's the commander of the entire army battalion around here. He's one of the most powerful men in the district." The realization seemed to ripple through the crowd like wildfire. Commandant Harris, known for his leadership and unwavering dedication to his family and his country, was a well-respected figure in the community. The mere mention of his name made people stand up straighter, knowing full well the weight it carried. He was not a man to be trifled with, and his love for his children was no secret. Officer James, who had no idea who Catherine was when he attacked her, began to feel the crushing weight of his mistake. His eyes widened as the murmurs grew louder. The color drained from his face as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. He had attacked the daughter of one of the most important men in the entire district, an army commander who would stop at nothing to protect his family. Catherine, still shaken, sat in her wheelchair once again with the help of a kind stranger. Ben stayed close by, gripping her hand tightly. He could see their father now, rushing through the crowd, his face full of concern and anger. The second Commandant Harris laid eyes on his daughter's tear-streaked face and her scraped, bleeding hands. Something inside him shifted. His calm, measured expression hardened into one of fierce determination. Commandant Harris walked straight up to Officer James, his eyes burning with fury. The officer, who had been so intimidating just moments before, was now visibly shaking. He stammered, trying to explain. It was a mistake. I didn't know. But Commandant Harris cut him off with a steely glare. You put your hands on my daughter, he said, his voice low and deadly calm. I don't care what your excuse is. The crowd fell into a tense silence. No one dared move as Commandant Harris took a step closer to the officer, his powerful presence making the man shrink back. Ben stood by, holding his breath, and Catherine wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to be brave in front of her father. As the crowd watched in awe, the zoo's management and other security officers arrived. They had heard what happened and immediately took control of the situation. Officer James, now sweating and pale, was quickly surrounded by his colleagues. He knew there was no way out of this. His actions had consequences far beyond what he ever expected. We will handle this, the zoo manager said nervously, approaching Commandant Harris. Officer James will be suspended immediately, and will launch an investigation. But Commandant Harris wasn't satisfied. He turned to the manager, his voice still controlled but filled with authority. That's not enough. My daughter was attacked in your zoo by your staff. This man needs to be held accountable. The zoo manager nodded quickly, agreeing to involve the police and promising that Officer James would face legal consequences. The crowd, still silent, parted as Officer James was escorted away, his head hanging low. The reality of his actions had finally caught up with him. As the tension began to lift, Commandant Harris knelt beside Catherine, his expression softening. Are you okay, sweetheart? He asked gently. Catherine nodded, though her hands still stung and her heart ached from the shock of it all. I'm okay now, she whispered, grateful to have her father and brother by her side. Though the day had taken a dark turn, Catherine knew one thing for sure. Her father would always protect her, no matter what. And Officer James had learned a lesson he would never forget. Justice would always catch up with those who did wrong. As Officer James was led away, head down and shoulders slumped, the gravity of the situation began to sink in for everyone who had witnessed the events. The once cheerful day at the zoo had taken a dark turn, and people were still murmuring about what had happened. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the tension lingered in the air. Commandant Harris remained focused on his daughter, ensuring that she was okay, while holding back the anger that still simmered inside him. Catherine, though shaken, sat quietly in her wheelchair as her father knelt beside her, his face full of concern. Her hands were scraped, and her heart still raced from the terrifying encounter. She had never experienced anything like this before, and the fear of being so vulnerable stuck with her. But with her father by her side, she felt safe again. You were so brave, Commandant Harris said softly, brushing a strand of hair away from Catherine's face. I'm proud of you. Catherine looked up at her dad, her eyes still watery, but she managed a small smile. I was really scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to be scared anymore, her dad reassured her, placing a hand on her shoulder. What that man did was wrong, and he's going to face the consequences. Ben stood close by, watching his father with admiration. He had never seen Commandant Harris so fierce, yet so gentle at the same time. Ben was relieved that everything was being taken care of, but the memory of Officer James pushing Catherine still made his blood boil. He wanted justice, just like his father did. Zoo management quickly stepped in, acknowledging the severity of the incident. The zoo's director, a tall, nervous man, approached Commandant Harris with a worried expression. "I'm truly sorry for what happened, sir," he said. "We are taking immediate action against Officer James. He's been suspended, and we will be conducting a full investigation." But Commandant Harris wasn't ready to let it go with just that. His eyes locked with the director's, and his voice was firm. "Suspension is not enough. My daughter was attacked in your zoo by someone you hired. This needs to be reported to the police. Officer James must face legal consequences." The director swallowed hard and nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll ensure that happens. We'll cooperate fully with the authorities." Satisfied that justice was beginning to take its course, Commandant Harris stood up, taking a deep breath. The zoo staff helped clean and bandage Catherine's hands, and though her physical injuries were minor, the emotional wounds would take longer to heal. Ben stayed close to her side, offering comfort with his presence, while their father took charge of making sure everything was handled properly. Word of the incident spread quickly. Officer James's actions shocked many, and the zoo took swift action to ensure such an event would never happen again. They implemented new training programs for their staff, focusing on compassion, kindness, and inclusion for all visitors, especially those with disabilities. Commandant Harris insisted on this change, knowing it was the only way to make sure people like Officer James learned the importance of respect for everyone, regardless of their background or abilities. For Officer James, the consequences were severe. He lost his job, faced charges for his actions, and was required to perform community service. But more than that, he was ordered to attend sensitivity training, where he would learn about the harm his prejudice and anger had caused. It was a harsh lesson, but one that he needed to learn. His cruelty toward Catherine had cost him everything. As the weeks passed, Catherine slowly began to recover. She still loved to draw, and though the memory of that terrible day stayed with her, she refused to let it take away her joy. Her father and brother supported her, making sure she knew she was safe and loved. Commandant Harris also kept his promise to ensure justice was served, and he continued to fight for change, not just for his daughter, but for all children who might be vulnerable to such cruelty. In the end, Catherine knew that her father's love and determination had protected her. Officer James's actions had been cruel and unfair, but justice had been served. The experience taught them all about strength, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your time and support. Before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new story. Your feedback means the world to us. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't leave without subscribing, as your support allows us to keep bringing these stories to life for you.